Hello and welcome to part 1 of this new Django project, which is a Django Rest Framework project. So you might already be familiar with image API services such as Unsplash here, which provides an API system to hook into millions of images for your projects. So we'll be looking at trying to implement some of those features within our project. So what you're looking at here is what we're going to develop in this first project. We're going to get everything up and running. So we have this home page here, which is just an introduction, and we're going to get some images sorted so that we have or start to develop an image library. So each image has a number associated to it, an ID, a unique ID, which can be used to serve that image from our Django Rest Framework. So this image, for example, is being served from our API. So if I go into this code here, we'll see that this is being imported into this page via the URL. So just inspect that. So down here, this image. So we're going to allow users to utilize a link or use a link, and they just need to drop that into their image tag element here. And then that will then link to the image from our API system and return the image. So for example, if I were to actually go into the code and change to number 3, for example, you can see it changes here. So this is, like I said, a very common service. This is not only the only thing that we're going to develop. This is just one of the features that we're going to develop and what we focus on in the first tutorial. So this could really be quite functional type of service to have if you're developing lots of websites and you're building up your own image library. You could utilize this to serve your templates, or you could utilize this as placeholders, image placeholders for your projects. So welcome again to the Image API Service project. So our aim is to serve images from our Django API using URLs embedded into web apps. So that's not the only thing that we're going to look at. So in this project, we are going to start a new Django application. We'll then build up the Django application, so with 3 apps, so the core, images, and the API. And then we configure the API. So in this tutorial, really the main feature is looking at custom renders. So serving images from our API. Okay, so apologies to keep yapping on here, but just to give you a good overview of what's going to happen, or some of the things that are going to happen in this project. So yeah, we're building an image API service. So we're going to go through building user registration. We'll look at image authorship, and then we'll potentially look at user authentication. So we'll go through basic, session, and token authentication with our REST framework. And then we'll look at permissions. So view level, project level, and custom permissions. Potentially then we can move into membership. So we can use our API system to kind of generate some sort of membership system and potentially then sell. So we could develop this also into some sort of e-commerce system, which we can then start selling images and so on. And we could also think about image license plans, how we might develop that within our RESTful framework. So because we're building a RESTful framework on API system, we can also explore front ends. So maybe React or Vue, and we could potentially split this off so we could build a complete React or Vue application utilizing our API. Of course, we're using images, so there's potential here to utilize cloud storage and management, and also then, while we go through different iterations, look at optimization. Okay, so I hope you stay with us for this project. It will take a number of weeks to complete, maybe months. So there is a few different projects, as you've probably seen on this channel, the concurrent projects. So have a look at those other projects too. Okay, so let's get started building this project. So with this project, I am starting from complete scratch here, completely new project. We'll go through every single step here. If you don't want to see these initial steps and so on, obviously the code is in the description. So please go ahead and have a look. It's completely free. You can do whatever you like with it. And then in addition to that, obviously you can use the timeline to skip ahead to different sections. So I will apologize in advance. This doesn't actually cover much kind of back-end DRF type of code. There's only about 8 lines of code needed to get this type of service working. So a lot of this will be kind of set up, getting all the different systems in place so that we can work on it in future tutorials. Okay, so let's go ahead and first of all create a new virtual server, or sorry, virtual environment. So I'll create a new folder called VMV and put a virtual environment inside of there, and then we can start off the new virtual environment. So /script/a for activate. So now we've activated the virtual environment, so we can go ahead and pip install Django. Okay, so now that's done, let's add a new project. So remember that I want to use this project inside of this folder here, not make a new folder inside of a folder type of situation. So I use the dot parameter at the end here, and that's going to make a new project right here in the folder. I've got my manage.py file here. So what I can do now is obviously manage py, and I'm going to make a few different apps here. So I'm going to need an app called, so start app, I'm going to need an app called API. So I'll create that one first. It's going to have all the API functionality. So the second app I make is called images. So go ahead and make that app. So now we have the core, which is the main Django app here, our core app. And now we have the images and also the API. So we can go ahead now and obviously in the core, go to the settings. I don't need that. And then we just add that to the installed apps. So API, and then obviously I need to also include images. Okay, so now let's go ahead and go into the images and the models. So we're going to create a table for the images to store the images. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's just think about some of the different items that we might want to include. So we're going to have an images table. And then probably what we're going to also have is a category table, because we want to associate images potentially with categories. So later on down the line, we'll configure or we'll create some sort of advanced search feature that we can utilize from within our API or to interface with our API. So let's set up the categories first, and then we go ahead and set up the image table. Okay then, so from the top, let's import models, so we can extend from the models and create our database or our tables and our fields. And then we go ahead and we're going to be utilizing the time zone because we want to capture when the user uploads the image. So when they uploaded the image. So we utilize that tool. And then of course, we also want to utilize the user information. So because we want to make a connection between the image that's uploaded and the actual user that's uploaded it. So we'll get that data from the user table. So remember, we don't need to make the user table. Django will have that already built in once we create or make migrations. So let's go ahead and first of all, we're going to create a user directory path. So this is a path that we're going to utilize to upload the images to. So you can see here that we've created this function here, user directory path, and then basically we're going to return a link and actually put the image inside of there. So we're going to need to create a new folder shortly, a media folder. Inside that media folder, there's going to be a folder called images, and we're saving the image inside of that using the file name. So we use the file name, and then the file will be stored right there. So media/images/ and then the file name. So that's where it's going to be stored, the images. Okay, so we go ahead and now create the category table. So extend from model, and then we use the name. So we just have the name of the category, and then we just return the name to make it easy to see what fields we're looking at. So we'll do that, and then we'll then create the image table. So the images table is going to have options. So we want to flag the image maybe active and deactivated. Maybe there's an issue with an image, we want to deactivate it and not make it available to the customers, to the API. So that just gives us an option to activate and deactivate different images if we don't want them seen. So we go ahead and first of all create the category link. So we're going to create a foreign key to the category so we can connect the category and the image table. So notice here we have protect. So this means that at the moment, we can sort this out later, but it means that we can't, when we add a new category, say category of waterfall, and then we add an image, we connect the image to a category. So when we delete the category, what we're saying here is that we don't also want to delete the image. And we're using protect here to basically prevent someone from actually deleting that category. So that's in place. And there's different settings here that we can configure. For example, if we wanted to, if the category is deleted, we could also delete all the images in that category. That's not always desirable. So we go ahead and create the title. So we add a title field and then an alt field. So the alt field could be utilized later. If you remember, when we serve images to a web page, normally there's an alt field which describes the image for accessibility options. So we'll add that in for now, and then we'll add the image, which is basically the path to the image. So notice here that the path that we're using is now the connection to the code up here, the user directory path. So that just defines the path. We bring that in there and we've just added the path, and that will then upload the image to that path in our system. So notice that we're using a default. So I've added a default here. So if we don't upload an image and save images, we're just going to have a default image, which is fairly useless, but let's just add that in for now. So we have a slug to the image, and then created. That's the time zone. So we're going to store when the image was created within our system, and then we're going to use the foreign key to the user model. So this is going to build a connection between the user table and the image table so that we can connect the user up to the image and associate a user to an image. And then we go ahead and have status. So this was our status options here, active and deactivated. We set the default to active, so the images are always active when the user uploads them. And then we can move ahead. And in actual fact, there we are. And that's that done. So that's going to be our default table for this system. So as you might imagine, with all the models now completed, we can now go ahead and just migrate those. So make migrations and then migrate. We can't. Apologies, I've forgotten a step here. We also need to install Pillow. So Pillow is a tool that's going to allow us to manage images within our project. Notice that we're using an image field here, and we can't because Pillow is not installed. So apologies. So let's just pip install Pillow. Really simple. Okay, so once that's done, we can now go ahead, apologies, and make migrations. And then of course, commit to our database. We're going to migrate. Excellent. So now let's configure where images are going to be stored. So let's create a new folder in the root directory of our project. We need to call this media. So this is a function of Django, the media function. So we're going to create media folder, and let's just remember where our folder structure is. So inside of images, we have the model. So our image structure, or media structure folder should be media and then images. So this is going to be automatically generated every time we upload an image, the file name. So let's go into media and create a new folder inside of there. And we need to call it images. So now that's all configured and set up for that configuration. So now what we need to do is actually tell Django we're using this media feature. So let's go ahead and do that. So first of all, we just need to now go inside of our core project here in settings, just remove that. And at the bottom here, we'll just add 2 more lines. So we set up the media root. So we use the OS path to join the base directory of this project and the folder called media. And then we set up the media URL to /media. Okay, so now that's in place. The next step we need to do is just go into the URLs and set up the URLs so that we can utilize this. So because we're utilizing our local host, or we're developing here on the machine, we need to just add this additional parameter. So we need to import 2 things, the static and settings, so that we can then add a new line of code at the end here to include that path. So that just ensures that this media folder works within our development. within our local development environment here. Okay, so I'm guessing the next thing that we can do, is to test to see if this is working. So we should be able to now upload images to our server here. So let's go ahead and first of all, we need to go to images and go to admin because we need to configure the model to make it available within the admin area. So I'll just copy and paste this in. I'll go through this quickly. So obviously we import admin facilities and then we import in our model dot being this project, our model. So we import our model because we want to then display different items. So we go ahead and register the images model and we just say that we want to list or display these type of things in the admin panel. So that's what the items that you're going to see in the list. And we want to pre-populate the slug field with the title. So we might not use the slug just yet, but it might be useful to have a link or create a slug to the image in case we want to use it for something else in a future project. So we go ahead and also register the category table so that we can add some categories. So this just makes the tables available that we created earlier available in our admin area. So we can now go ahead and run py, manage py, and then we can then create a super user. There seems to be a problem, and I think I know what it is. Okay, so it says OS not defined. This is in the settings. To apologize. So let's go ahead and just go into the core settings. It's just up here in actual fact. And we're just going to import OS at the top here. So just import OS. We should now be able to do that. So we're going to create a new super user, an admin user. Just going to call that admin. And then no email, password admin. And then yes to that. And now we can go ahead and run the server. Okay, so let's go over to the server. So this is the final view. Remember, this is what we're building. So let's go ahead now and access the admin. So /admin, and then we log in using our admin. Okay, so you can see here that we've got our categories and images. So let's just add a category. We're just going to add a category called Django. And then let's add a new image. So we'll go ahead and add an image. So the title is going to be called Starting with Django. And then the alt will be image of Django, say. And so now we selected an image. We can now go down here, select an author for this. Status is going to be active and we press save. Okay, so if we now go back into our project, we can now see in our media folder, we have an image called Django. And that was the name of the image that we uploaded. So our image upload system is working. Okay, so now let's pad out and build up our front end. So we're going to add a new folder here called templates. So this is in the project root folder called templates. So we're going to use this to create our templates. So we're going to create a new folder here called images. So the images app here is going to be utilizing the image folder here, the images folder. So we'll utilize that for that. So let's create a new file here. We'll call this index.html. And then in addition to that, we will also create a new file called all images.html. So we're just going to create two new pages. So we will use the template system within Django. So we'll create a new folder here. We're just going to call this base. And inside of base, we're going to create a new file called base. That's going to have all the HTML. And then we're going to extend all the other templates from this. So in addition to base, we'll also create a new file here called footer. We might make separate footers for different pages. And there we go. Okay, so we can't get to these pages without URLs. So we'll do that next. So let's go ahead now. Remember in the core, this is our main URL file. So let's first of all just build this up and connect these URLs to both of our apps, our API app and our images app. Okay, so first of all then, let's just create a link to our API app. So we also need to include up here, so to utilize the include. So that makes a connection to our API app. And then we can do the same thing to images. So we're going to add a namespace for images because we want to create dynamic links in our project. So we add a namespace and you can see that goes to the images URL. So now we come out of core because now we want to create a new file inside of our API called urls.py, and then we'll just populate that. So we just populate this page, otherwise we'll probably receive an error if we don't. So we just set out the template here in the API URLs, and then let's just do the same. Let's just do the same, in the images. So create a new file called urls.py, and then we go ahead again and just build that up. Okay, so we just start empty. Here we've got the app name equals images. So that's because we created a namespace for this. So we just describe the namespace again, app name equals images, and we've got a blank URLs at the moment. So that just sets that out. So now we need to just configure maybe a URL so that we can access some of our templates. So let's go ahead and start with the index. So we're going to start with a really simple page for our index. So we're just going to be utilizing the template view for this because we're not going to be making a view for our index page. All the images are going to be served from our API onto our main page. So we created this URL here and notice that it is a template view, and the template name we describe as images. So inside of images we have index.html. So it's right there. Okay, so now head over to the base templates, and I'm going inside of base. Now we're going to build up our base template. So this is a template we're going to extend other pages from. So here we're just going to set out the HTML. So we use the doc type, we've got the language, we've got a head section with some meta tags. So this is from Bootstrap. So just head over to bootstrap.org, I think it is, and then you'll be able to get the template for this. Go to the starter section in the documentation. Here we're utilizing the Bootstrap CSS for this project, and then we can go ahead and just create a title. So notice here that the title is using a block. So we want to replace this on every page so we can change the title dynamically on every page. I'll just set up some styling here for later. We'll see that in place. And then we create our body. Inside the body, we just have a block content because this is what we're going to extend from. So all other pages of code are going to be placed inside of this block. And then we go ahead and create some of the scripts needed for Bootstrap. So again, this is just copied and pasted from Bootstrap. Okay, so that represents our base template. So very briefly then, nothing crazy inside of the footer page to begin with. We've just got a simple footer with some containers ready to be populated later in the project. While we're doing this, I noticed that there was a mistake I made in the URLs and the core. Of course, the include shouldn't be there. It needs to be next to the path. So we can just add that right there. So I apologize for that. So everything should be working so far. Okay, so then we come to the index page of the images. So this is our main home page, and you might imagine there's quite a bit of code here. So just very briefly then, so you can see that we're extending the base. So this is the base file that we created, and you can see that we're updating the block title of the base utilizing this. So welcome to the blog. We can obviously change that to welcome to the API service. Okay, so we've got that in place. That updates the block of the base, and then we want to update the block of the base, the block content block, of the base. So inside of base, we had a block content, and we're going to replace that with all the code that's going to be down here. So notice here we're utilizing some fonts. I've imported some fonts into the project. This code here isn't going to be inside of a style sheet simply because you can then just see easily what's happening with the style. So you can see here I'm just updating some of the different classes I'm going to be utilizing here in this project. And then we come down here, we've got the container. So I've maxed the width of the container to a certain size, and everything's going to be inside of that. And you can see here we've got the first section here. This first section, apologies for the small size here, is going to be the top section. Further down here we've got the section for a Jumbotron, and we've got another container and so on. This is just Bootstrap we're utilizing here. Feel free to look over the code here. I'll just point out the main features that are going to be important for this system. So we're going to remove that for now. So we'll just get this working. So further down, we've got another Jumbotron. I'll just get rid of, no, we can keep that. So nothing special here, just a lot of different containers. So feel free to have a look at the code in the repository. Just follow the code through. At the bottom here, we've incorporated the footer. Okay, so let's go and have a look to see what this looks like. Okay, so you should receive an error because there's a few other steps that we need to do. So first of all, we need to just go into the URLs of the core. Now remember that we're using the images for the base root directory, so we're just going to remove that to the base. So we're going to use the images app as the base path, and obviously inside that base path is an index, so we'll be able to run that as the root directory of our website. So secondly, we're using templates, and we haven't configured those yet, so we need to go into settings, and then we need to go down to the templates here. We need to just configure the templates. So what we're doing here is similar to what we did previously at the bottom. We're just going to use the OS to create a path using the base directory of our project, and then a folder called templates. That's where we've selected or utilized or applying all of our templates inside the folder called templates. Of course, you can go ahead and change that if you wanted to. You could use a completely different name. So let's go back into our project and refresh. And you can now see we have the placeholder homepage for our project. So it's probably worth noting at this point, if you've just copied and pasted that template into your project, you'll probably find that there's a few errors, okay? Because the end template has links that don't exist yet in the system. So don't worry if they don't, but let me just show you what I mean. So here, for example, I've removed the SRCs of the images. So if you go throughout, there's about 3 different links. There's one here, there's href that you can remove, and just here, for example. So if you want to get this working, if you're following it step by step and you want to get this working, just go through, and there's the final one just here. Just make sure that you remove those links, otherwise you will receive an error because those links don't exist. Okay, so that should get everything working. So that's the entire thing. So these links are just text, so you don't need to worry about those. Another link there and another link there on line 93. Okay, so let's now move on. So let's just finish off the templates for the system. There's only 2 pages. This home page here, which we're going to fill up with images shortly once we get our API working. And the second page here, which is just going to be a list of all images that are currently in our system. So let's get this working first. Working backwards, let's work out the logic first, get the view sorted, and then we get the URL in place, and then we get the template sorted. So head over to the image views, and let's create a new view for this. So all we need to do is just select all the images from the table and just output them. Really simple. So we're going to use a class-based view here. So we're just importing in the list view, and we're going to then import the images table. We're going to need that to collect all the images data, and then we're going to use the model here. We're using the class view here, so the model images, and then template equals images, and then it was called all images.html. Okay, so that was the template that we built right here at the bottom here. So that's the template. So that's literally all we're going to need to get that working. So that's just going to loop through all the images, and then we can then collect those images on the all images page and just output them on the page. So now let's head over to, just close some of this down. So now let's head over to the images and then inside the URLs. So just close this up. So in the images URL, we now need to make a URL for that view. So we are using class-based views, so we go ahead and From views, import the image list view. That's what we called our method there. And then we go ahead and create a path. So let's just create a simple path. We're going to call that images. That's going to take us to the page that shows us all the images. Give it a name of images, and obviously we link that to our view. So we haven't completed the view yet, or the template, sorry, but you can see that it's working. So I've headed over to /images. So now we're ready to build the template. Well, to start off with, the template for this is just going to be a copy and paste of the previous template. So let's just get the index and copy this and paste it right there. So what we're going to need to change here is just a few things. We don't want the bottom section. So we want to keep the top section here. So the top bit, and then I think the first section here. And then we're going to remove this bottom section and just replace this with a new section. So that should give us, if we go back, the top section like we saw on the home page. So now we're just going to list out all the different items we have in the database. So remember, we did add one item to the database, so we should see one item shortly. Okay, so this is the new section we've created, a new container, and we've got py, so padding top and bottom, a new row, and this is where we have the loop. Okay, so we didn't specify context for our data, so the default context for our data is object_list. So that's where our data is stored and transferred to this template in Django if we don't specify a context for our data. Object_list. So we're just going to loop through this. We're using this for loop here. Every time we loop through the data is going to be placed inside of the post variable, and we're going to extract that out. So here you can see that post.getAbsoluteURL. So we get the URL of the of our image if we need that, so we can make it into a link for some reason. And then you can see here that we used a rounded. I've used some shadow. This is all from Bootstrap. And here we've got the actual image. So I use the post image URL to get the URL for this image. I give it an alt, so the post title. I suppose that should be the post alt in actual fact. And then next up, we then just output the title and the post ID. Okay, so that's all we have really in place here. So let's have a look to see what that looks like. So we go back and refresh. We just have one item here. This is the only item we have in the database. We just output in the name and the ID of the item. So just the ID here so that the users can use it to build their links to access our images. Okay, so you can see that I just truncated limited the amount of characters for the title. You might want to do that. That's just a feature I've added in there just to make sure that the text doesn't go too far across and then maybe onto the next line. Okay, great. So hopefully you've got that working. Finally, we've got to the Django Rest Framework, DRF. So we're going to now implement that into our system and get our RESTful service working. So to start off with then, let's just close all this. So we're going to first of all install the Django Rest Framework. So we can do that by using pip. So we'll just stop the server, Control C. And so pip install, and then the Django Rest Framework. So that's nicely installed. Then we just need to go ahead to the core, because we just need to define the fact that we've incorporated that into our project. So we can do that by using the rest_framework. So we just move that down. So down here, or up here, sorry, we'll just add that in. So the third party REST framework. Okay, so now we've applied that to our system. So at this point, normally what happens is we create an API and we return JSON text. And we use that JSON text on our page to do something. So here we're starting off by utilizing various media types, or in this case, we're going to be utilizing images. So we're not returning JSON from our RESTful API, we're going to return images. So we need to head over to the Django Rest Framework documentation. It's definitely worth having a read through here of the renderers to get an idea of what's happening. But essentially here, what we need to do is we need to create our own custom render or renderers for this. So that's the first thing we need to do. And it does actually specify further down here, it does actually specify how you might do that for different media types. So here we go, for example, this is a renderer for JPEG. So we can do the same thing for PNG, for example. So in this system, we will set up two custom renderers, one for JPEGs and one for PNGs. So those are the two types of images that we're going to collect and return within our system. So let's start off then creating our renderers inside of our API. So we're going to just create a new file for this. So we'll call this custom renderers. There we go. And we're then, because the file extension pi, so then we then go in and then we create our renderers. So like I said, we're going to import, first of all, renderers from the REST framework. So we're going to need to utilize that. And now we can spell them out. Okay, so here we go. So we've got two renderers here, one for JPEG. So we define the media types and the format. So JPEG file, the character set of none. So the default is UTF-8. The renderer style, binary. So here we're just specifying some of the parameters in order to transfer this type of data, to work with this data within this type of environment. So we've got two sets here. So we've got one for JPEG and one for PNG. So that's our custom renderers sorted. Let's go back now into our view. So we utilize class-based views from the REST framework generics. So we go ahead and do that. Then we set up a new view, a new class here. So we're going to call this image API view generic. So we're going to use the retrieve API view. Okay, so now we need to import our custom renderers. So we can do that easily. There we go. So custom renderers. And of course, because we've done that, we also need to refer to them up the top here to link them in. So that's easily done. So I referred to it via API app.custom renderers. And then I'm going to import the JPEG renderer and the PNG renderer. So notice that I'm only going to be utilizing, I specify the PNG renderer. Oh, sorry, the JPEG renderer. So I'm just going to be utilizing JPEGs to begin with. Okay, so to finish this off then, we're going to overwrite and then import our renderer classes. In this case, just a JPEG renderer. And then we're going to create a query set. So we're going to query the database. So from the user is going to define what ID they want to use. The ID is connected to an individual image. So in our image table, obviously we've got image IDs, which are unique, and we use those to collect the individual image and display that individual image. So that's what we're doing here. We're just creating that query, and then we put that data inside of this new variable here called data, and then we're just going to return. So the response is the data, which is the image, and then we just define the content type as image JPEG. So this is just a baseline for this project, just to get the ball rolling for this project. So now let's move over to the URLs for this so that we can access this data. Okay, so let's import our view, the image API view. That's what we called it. And now let's make our URL pattern. So what we want to have is the user typing in the domain name, which is obviously just the 127 loopback address. Make sure we utilize obviously port 8000 at this point. And then they need to type in API, because we're in the API. We can change that, of course. So they have to type in API. Remember, the URLs here are just being extended from our core. So API here. So if you didn't want to use API, you could just remove it from there. So API, and then the URL is going to have /ID. You could change that if you wanted to, and then /, and then the ID of the image. So that's what we're building here. The URL is going to be that format, and we'll see that shortly. And obviously we're going to use the image API view. Okay, so that's literally all that we need to do there. I say that, as per normal, I get a little bit too excited when I create the views, so let's just make sure we add in all the dependencies. Obviously we're returning a response, so we need to import that in. And of course, we're trying to make a query on the images table, so we need to import that in too. And then finally, I will remove the renderers class from outside the method here. Apologize. Let's just put it before then. It won't work afterwards. It has to be beforehand. So with that in place, with all those imports, yep, I think we're now ready to go. So we don't have any problems. So what we can do now is test this out. So remember that our URL is going to be the API. Inside of that app, we've set up the URL to take in ID, and then we only have one image at the moment, which is number 1. So we can run that, and there we go. We have the image served. So let's take this URL, go back, and now let's just add the image right here. So back in our code, we have the templates, in the images. So on the index page at the top here of our index page, we added a link here. So find a list of all the images, and then that was a link to the next page. So down a little bit further in the next section, so here, for example, we could add, but I think it's before, it's just here. So on line 60, on the right-hand side, we can add the image to the right-hand side, width 100. So we go back here, we should now be able to serve from our API an image. And there we go. So I should now be able to go ahead in the admin here. I'm just going to add a new image, press save. Let's just go back and just check. We need to hook this up in a second to images. So this takes us, so I've got a new image here now 2. So now I can go ahead and just test to see if that works. So let's just put this image at the bottom here. There's an image holder right at the bottom. Add that number 2. So I should be able to serve that now. So refresh that page, and there we go. There's the image right there. So you can see it's all working. Obviously, you can now go ahead and link this page to the list of all pages, which is /images. So let's just do that next. So we just use a dynamic link here. So we use the image app. Inside of that, we'll go into the URLs and we'll look for the named URL called images. So we'll just check, make sure that's there. Images, yep, so that shouldn't be a problem. So we save that, go to our page, press refresh, click here. That takes us to the page with all the images. So there we go. So we have everything in place now, ready to start the project and the next tutorial. Okay, so hopefully you've just seen how simple that is to build an API service using Django. So like I said, traditionally at this point, we'd created some sort of JSON return, some text, and we created a nice API system with text. I thought this would be slightly more interesting. We will have a look at different formats, data formats, returning from our API system, as well as all the other things that you've either mentioned that you want to cover in the Django Rest Framework tutorials, or like I explained at the start. So hopefully you've got this starter project ready. Have a look at the code if you want to just follow the code from the code as I talk through it. If you've got any problems getting this working, please let me know. I apologize for sparing you some of the details over custom renderers, etc. We will go into a lot more detail as we move deeper into this series. I just wanted everyone to get started and up and running for us to now move on to the next tutorial. So hopefully I'll see you in the next tutorial. Please like and subscribe if you want to. And like I said, I'll see you in the next tutorial.